Okay, let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, our beloved Guru Deva, Paramahansa Yoganandaji, saints of all religions, beloved Swamiji, we lovingly bow before you all. Divine Mother, great masters, help us to maintain a positive and uplifted attitude through all of our experiences, throughout all of our lives. Help us to uplift our energy, to use that attitude to help us expand into thy infinite life. Help us always to remember that the most difficult obstacles become our greatest opportunities. Om, peace. Amen. Focus on the words of this chant, awakening in God's light, in his love, in his joy, but to really feel that sense of awakening into those divine qualities. And let's meditate together for a few minutes. We'll have some music now. Sai Ganesh is going to post the lyrics to this song for you. So if you look in the chat box, you'll see them. Very simple, very lovely song that Swamiji wrote. As most of you know, probably all of you by now, this past summer, Lakshmi and I spent a great deal of our time driving up and down Route 5. It's interesting when I reflect on that time, or when it comes to mind, it just, it feels like such sweet time. And it was really sweet time. And then I have to remind myself we were driving up and down Route 5 because my son-in-law was so sick and he died, of course, in a little less than 4 months. But it was precious time for us. It was precious time in many ways. But I remember one day we spent our entire trip down thinking of all of the chants that we would do for each of these emotions. And so far, they've made no sense to me. It's like, why did that chant come to our mind? But today, it really did, because and I never remember what we're going to chant. Lakshmi made a record of them, and she's been chanting them, but I have no idea what's happening until I get here. But tonight we're going to talk about how to avoid feeling bitter, or to neutralize bitterness or overcome that feeling of bitterness in our lives. And both the chant that we did, I awaken thy light, I awaken thy love, I awaken thy joy, it just feels so antithetical to bitterness, but I thought that was a good chant. And then same with these songs that Swamiji's chosen. This is such a simple and sweet, there's so much sweetness in this song that you realize when you're listening to it. One could never feel bitter if you were genuinely diving deep into not just the words are dear, but that simple melody that he wrote to this song that we just sang. So let me read to you the words that Swamiji wrote about bitterness, the secret of overcoming bitterness. The secret of overcoming bitterness is not allowing oneself to feel that you deserve more from life than you are getting. To not allow oneself to feel that you deserve more from life than what you are getting. For life will always mete out to you exactly what you earn from it. Isn't that interesting? Life will always mete out to you exactly what you earn from it. That's very interesting wording, of course. Swamiji was nothing if not a perfect wordsmith. He does such amazing plays on words and sharing of an idea through a vibration. Remember a few weeks ago, we were on January 1st, when I didn't want to talk about cynicism. And then it just turned out to be such a uplifting class a couple of weeks ago, or several weeks ago, I guess now. We skipped one because there was a fifth Friday. And I felt that way. You hear these words and I think to myself, who wants to talk about bitterness? But when you think about overcoming bitterness, a lot of what Swamiji has, he doesn't really, as I've said to you each time about each of these emotions, he doesn't write anything about bitterness. You can go all through every one of his books. We have something called the Ananda Library where we can look things up. You cannot find the topic of bitterness. There's no essay on bitterness. But I've searched in his books and in various ways just for the word. And then I see where it comes up, and then I work backwards. What is Swamiji trying to say to us about this quality? I had to laugh. I didn't print it out, so I don't have it here. But there's a stanza in the Gita where, I think it's a stanza and not Swamiji's interpretation. Sai Ganesh can help me. He's shaking his head. He always knows what I'm going to talk about before I talk about it. Twice today now I've said to him, how could you know where I'm going with this? But he did. But Swami, the stanza is about Krishna speaking to Arjuna, and at least the way Swamiji describes it, and this really is from memory because I don't have it here, but he's going through each of the qualities that are represented in the astral spine by each of the Pandavas, who are of course, the good guys. We'll call them the good guys, those uplifting qualities that we're trying to perfect. And then he basically says that it's in order to perfect all of these qualities, you have to overcome. And literally, I don't know, I didn't count it, but there's a paragraph that's about this big in the Gita, and there must be, I don't know, 60 qualities or something, like qualities of greed, of selfishness, probably of many of the emotions that we're talking about. But it was interesting to me that in that paragraph, 3 times, at least in the interpretation, the word bitterness is used. Bitterness, you think about it, it's a very difficult quality. I remember the story of Master. Probably many of you will remember it too. But there was a woman that he was talking to once, because people get grumpy and they hold on to this feeling as if they're gaining something from it. And she was complaining and complaining to Master, and it was about some surgery that she had had and all of the things that went wrong, or I don't even know how many things went wrong, but somehow she was complaining about this surgery. And Master said to her, very compassionately, of course, he said, "And how long ago was this surgery?" And she said, 20 years. And he said to her, 20 years ago? And you're still griping about it? I mean, because that's what she was doing. She was just griping. And this is what happens when people get bitter. They just hold on to so much, and they're so busy holding on to this extraordinarily negative, contractive quality that they can't pull themselves away. It has it has a huge amount of magnetism to it for certain people at certain times. I've told this story before, so I won't tell it in its length, but it just came to me of a patient that I took care of at County Hospital. This is many years ago already, but the story was compelling, and I remember it, and I can even see him. And I was in an exam room with him. I wound up seeing him over a long period of time. But he had really gotten a kind of raw deal, not just from life, but from the county and from pharmaceutical companies and from his insurance, which was probably Medi-Cal, but whatever it was, nothing would go right for him. And my heart ached for him. But he was so bitter. He was just so nasty and mean about it. And just, you could almost taste him when he walked into a room. And he's the man, some of you will remember, who I just said to him one day, you know, what you need to do is you need to go volunteer 2 days a week. And he got so furious with me and started screaming at me so loudly that nurses just came running in to make sure I was okay. He scared me, actually. I've said this before. I always made sure that he was on one side of the room and I was on the side with the door. After that, I wasn't going to let him get between me and the door. But I was trying so hard to help him overcome that feeling of bitterness, because it has that magnetism. There seems to be something that people can almost enjoy holding on to it. It's sort of like, look at this bowl of sour cherries the life has handed me, and then to just dwell on that for a long time. And one of the things I realized when I was backing up from the word bitterness in all of these books that Swamiji's written is that so much of this, well, so much of the spiritual path, but so much of our ability to overcome this quality of bitterness has to do with attitude. And in fact, it has to do with right attitude. And not just with right attitude, which is not a simple quality to cultivate. It actually takes many lifetimes. I mean, I don't know how many lifetimes, but I get that feeling that one needs to be fairly highly evolved spiritually before we can hold on to right attitude. Again, because there are so many experiences, so many bad attitudes, so many compelling moments in our lives that would take us away from that right attitude. Of course, the opposite's true. Once you have that, once you've cultivated it, developed it, it's very hard to live away from it. Even if you want to sneak over here and get a little bitter or judgmental or a kind of woes be to me or poor me, whatever it is, attitude, you just can't stay there very long. Again, once you've stepped into that arena, it's not just of having developed right attitude, it's of seeing how dramatically that changes all of life. And it does. And it's both having right attitude, which doesn't, in this case, simply mean a positive attitude. It does. But it means more than that, a solution-oriented attitude is what it is. That no matter what comes, we could either choose to be, tonight we'll use the word because we're discussing it, bitter, we could be angry, we could feel put upon. There's many things to call it. Or we could be somebody who doesn't just look for the solution, but where it occurs to us almost naturally. And then we have to put a lot of energy behind it. And we have to, for many reasons. Right attitude alone is not enough because it will dissipate if we don't bring a lot of good energy in to hold it up, if you will. But also because, as Swamiji tells us many times and in many ways, the sooner we can develop that right attitude, the sooner that we can bring our energy up to meet some obstacle, the greater the spiritual gain. And if you think of it, you could think of it with any analogy. The harder the weights you lift, the more muscle you're going to build. You know, often the harder we have to work for anything, the more we appreciate it, and that's just in a very worldly way. But when we're talking about our spiritual growth, about our soul, and its journey that it's on, and its way back home, then you can see that if we hold the bar here and we need to raise our energy, then this is what we accomplish. We didn't just climb a little hill. We didn't just wait for the experience to dwindle away. And then we could say, oh, see, it all worked out anyway. No, it's much more energizing. It's much more expansive. It's much more powerful in a very positive way when we really go after life, whatever it is. So it's right attitude with energy, and it's not allowing ourselves to think that any obstacle is too great for us to overcome in that way, to meet it, and that we can actually realize, really know that every obstacle that comes, and in some ways the greater the obstacle, comes for our spiritual growth. And the more willingness we have to meet those obstacles, again, with a good and right attitude and an uplifted energy and spirit, the obstacles become our greatest gifts. And it can sound like a platitude almost, except for probably almost all of you who have had this experience, you know it's not at all a platitude, it's the truth. And then we have to remember that each time an obstacle comes. You know, I wanted to turn away from it last time, but look what I got out of it or through it by working through it. Last week, a friend of mine sent me a link to a documentary that she said to me, watch this, you'll love it. And then she wrote something like, I feel so grateful for your presence in my life. That was her little note to me. I didn't want to watch that documentary actually because I could see she's a beautiful soul. I love this woman. I see her once, maybe twice a year. I've known her for a lot of years now. And the instant we sit down together, it's exactly like no time had passed. It's a relationship that really speaks to time being an illusion. And it's like we're soul sisters. But still, she is a practicing Jew, very, very involved in Judaism in her synagogue. And I just wasn't feeling the room this week to sort of step off of my path and watch a documentary that I was thinking about, albeit some great Jewish woman, but I knew it would be very Jewish. And I don't know what had me change my mind, but I watched it, I think it was yesterday, and it is an extraordinary documentary, and I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to tell you what it has to do with tonight, which is probably why I watched it yesterday, though I didn't know that. The documentary is called Dying Doesn't Feel Like What I Am Doing. Dying doesn't feel like what I am doing. And it's a story of an extraordinary woman. So this is a woman who was probably about my age and who lived through and grew up in the time of the Vietnam War and all of the marches and the marches for civil rights and just many things, women's rights. I mean, we were a real activist generation. And she didn't believe in God at all. She didn't ever call herself an atheist, but she didn't believe in God. And you could tell she was a pretty great, even as a kid. She was enthusiastic, she was creative, because now we're watching the story of her life. But she wound up meeting and marrying a man whose name was Paul Cowan, C-O-W-A-N, and her name was Rachel Cohen. And he was a writer for the Village Voice, which was a very big paper that came out of Greenwich Village. And it was a paper that was about all of this activist stuff. And together they did wonderful things. They were in the Peace Corps together. Anyway, they did many things. She was a young mother, and she was very ambivalent, really devoted mother, but that meant she couldn't go to work. She couldn't do a lot of the things that she wanted to do because she was a very creative woman with a lot of energy. So she and her friend just founded what was called the Purple Circle Child Care School, Purple Circle Child Care, which became very popular. Anyway, many things like that. But her mother-in-law and father-in-law, who were very well known, I think he was the president of CBS for a while, the father-in-law. So Paul was Jewish, she was not religious. She was born Christian, some type of Christian, but not religious. So they had this mixed marriage that was working very well, actually. But his parents were killed in a fire in their apartment building in New York City. And it just blew them away. And she started realizing that she couldn't do what was being asked of her She couldn't do it alone. And she realized that she needed a bigger container to hold that pain in. And because of that experience, she wound up converting to Judaism and becoming very involved in Judaism. In fact, she became a rabbi. Not that much later, her husband gets leukemia. And they were 36 when his parents died. He was in his 40s when he died. And she said that she knew that she needed to dive deeper into spirituality. She said the pain was nearly unbearable. She said it was ghastly. I mean, these are the words she used. She just couldn't begin to describe the loss of her in-laws. And then her husband, they had this phenomenal, active, creative, make things better in the world kind of life. And then he was just gone. And then the documentary goes on to where she develops a brain tumor. And I'm sitting here, I'm realizing I'm smiling, I'm telling you this story, but it's moment after moment in this woman's life, experience after experience, where one could easily develop bitterness. She did exactly the opposite. She uplifted and expanded her energy. These were conscious movements on her part. Her life is a perfect example of this. If you can get the documentary, please do. I don't really know because a link and a password were sent to me. But it's such a beautiful story of a soul on a journey, and no matter what life brings to that soul knows its job is to keep raising itself above and beyond whatever is happening on this material plane. Even though your in-laws are killed in a fire, your husband dies of leukemia at a very young age, you now have a brain tumor. And I took a lot of notes of things she said, but I'm not going to read them to you. But at one point, it was so striking to me. Somebody decided to do a documentary of her life. So they started from the moment the diagnosis of the brain tumor was made. And then, of course, there's all these flashbacks into her previous life, or her life prior to the brain tumor. And then through all the treatment of the brain tumor. But she went through all this radiation, all of this chemo. Never in this documentary, you're watching her go through it now. Take the chemotherapy, be sick, watch what it's like to have to get out around Central Park and go for a walk when you're this weak. And she's standing there and she's saying, this is hard. This is interesting. Listen to this. She says, this stage of life is very hard. She doesn't say dying, having a brain tumor. She says, this stage of life, it really rang for me. That's what she's still alive. And she's talking to who's ever on the other side of the camera. This moment is so hard. And she said, I just feel so blessed. That's not at all what you expected to come out of her mouth next. She's got a scarf on hiding her head. She looks like somebody who's dying, though she's up and about. She's talking about how challenging life is in this moment. And then says, I feel so blessed. And she talks about how at the very beginning of this, she once again knew she needed to create larger containers to hold the experience. She didn't contract herself to meet the experience. She expanded into it. So she wound up creating something called the Center for Jewish Spirituality. I don't think that's what it's called, but it's like that. She wrote a book called Wise Aging or Aging Wisely or something, all while she's going through these experiences, all by having the right attitude and the energy behind it to meet life right at that edge. What do you have for me now? She was saying. What are you going to give me now? How is that going to help me grow? And if we practice this, and if we remember it, and if we remember her story, and I want to tell you another story, one that I've told before, but it just popped in today. And these stories help us remember how we want to be when we come up against these experiences. I've said this to many of you. I've had an obsession, of course, with reading about the Holocaust, or after that I went through an obsession about reading about slavery, and not about slavery, although I did read about it, but about personal lives of so many people who were slaves. And people say to me all the time, why are you reading that? And I say, because I'm reading these stories of the extraordinary courage and willpower and willingness and commitment to living that people had. The people who made it through the Holocaust were not the people who just curled up and, let me be very careful how I say this, because many, many, many brave and extraordinary souls, 6 million people died. A lot of great souls died. But of those people who lived, I'm saying it better right now, of the people who lived, so many of them had not just courage, but right attitude, willpower, energy. They were creating a magnetism around themselves that would help them make it through these unimaginable, whether it's the Holocaust or being born into a family of slaves, living the way that the slaves had to live. I've thought to myself so many times, my God, could I do that? But I find myself reading those books because whatever happens to me, I want to be brave. I want to be positive. I don't want to complain and get bitter. Even now, I'm 73. What can happen in a way? But whatever it is that takes me out of this body, or whatever I need to deal with in the next month, year, 10 years, 20 years, who knows? I don't want to get bitter. I don't want to be questioning divine wisdom. I want to be bringing myself up to meet it. And we all do, or we wouldn't be here. That's why I read those books. That's why I loved watching this movie. That's how the great souls do it. That's how they do it. That's how they live through the unimaginable and then do such great things with their lives. I've told this story of a woman who I met when I had a practice of medicine. It was much smaller by this time, right here in Palo Alto. And a woman came in to see me one time who was a minister. Nobody had actually ever made her a minister. She just was a minister. She became one. She just started her own temple, her own church, and people just started following her. She was a beautiful, beautiful soul. But her story was that her father had worked for the resistance in the Castro days, and he was caught by Castro's people. And when he was caught, they took him and they took her. She was a little girl. And for 10 years, they were kept by Castro's people. And every day, they were brought together, and in front of each other, they were tortured. And they were tortured in unimaginable ways, and I won't describe a lot of what she told me, but she was disfigured in many ways because of it. And she suffered physically because of it, a lot of pain, having your body be so disfigured as it was. One day I said to her, you know, there are very few people who could, so she came to me so that I could be her doctor. And she would often say to me, what a blessing it was to meet you. And I would be thinking and then saying to her, are you kidding me? The blessing and the gift is mine. And it was. Every time I knew that woman was coming into my office, I knew that I would feel and I would be blessed. Not because she blessed me, not because she stopped and blessed me, but being in her very presence was a blessing. And I said to her, how do you think this is? So many people, the vast majority of people, would go through what you went through, they had to watch each other be tortured. And then the day they killed her father, they did it right in front of her. They brought him in and they killed him in front of her. 10 years. And after her father was killed, not long after, I forgot to tell you this, his friends from the resistance broke in somehow and they got her out. They saved her life. And I said to her, how do you think it is that you are this bright, shining soul, this embodiment of love? Because it's what she was. And that you're not angry or bitter. I remember using that word with her. And she said to me, you know, Shanti, she said, as I was leaving that cell, literally she was being dragged out, hurried along by her father's friends. She said, as I was leaving the cell, I said to myself, they've held you captive for 10 years now. Don't let them hold you captive anymore. What an amazing awareness, insight. I mean, just, that's where you want to be. You don't want to be complaining 20 years later about a surgery that you had. You want to be able to be living in joy even after an experience like what that woman went through. That is the antithesis of bitterness. But it takes work. It takes consciously raising our energy. It takes really remembering these stories, remembering these examples, being able to remind ourselves that whatever it is we're going to be asked to go through, whatever it is that life is giving us, that God and gurus are right there to go through it with us. That's what they want to do. They don't want to leave us to suffer. They want to help us walk whatever our path is, because that is the spiritual path. That's what we're doing here. That's why we meditate. That's why we listen to these talks, so that we can be making spiritual progress, so that we can be ready when the time comes, because it will come for every one of us. It'll come sooner for some of you than it did for me, because that's what happens in life. But when I'm up against whatever the it is, and it's not just death, it's hardship. She didn't die when her in-laws died, this Rachel Cowan. She had to live through that. And that's what she did. She didn't die when her husband died. She had to live through it. She had to learn from it and expand with it. And everything in life is like that. Everything. If we can learn to hold our hands out to God and Guru and say, I'm ready for whatever you're going to bring me. I'm ready. Let me feel my karma. Let me spend this life neutralizing some of it, dissipating some of it, all of it, if possible. I'm ready to go through anything because I know that if I go through it with you, then I will be at least more uplifted, at least more expansive, if not free, if not completely free. And this is what it means to overcome bitterness. It doesn't mean working through on the physical level. I'm going to forgive them, I'm going to forgive them. It does mean that. It does. And often it means letting go long before, your mind still wants to hold on. But what they said to me or what they did, or I hear these stories and I think to myself, wow, I've spent so much time, just wasted so much time on minutia when I had nothing better to complain about, probably, but no more. And reading of Swamiji's and being handed that documentary and deciding to watch it yesterday, it's like you know something now. You can really get the sweetness of this song that we sang, the awakening in God's light, in His love, in His joy. You can do that. That's what Rachel did. That's what this minister friend of mine did. That's what people do who make those conscious decisions. Let's see. Oh, it's early. I had no idea. Let me just see if anybody has comments, stories, questions, anything.
I'll ask a question.
Yes, if Sai Ganesh is going to read a question to me.
How do we navigate when we have a family member or a dear friend who lives from a lens of being bitter? It's difficult to hold space and be the person hearing it and wishing and praying things to be different for them.
It's a very good question. And it's the next challenge. Oh, I'm sorry. So, let me Sai Ganesh, tell me if I don't get it right. But the question was, what do you do in life if you have a family member or somebody you're close with who it sounded like is kind of wed to bitterness? They have that kind of attitude towards everything. And how, I want to quote the end of it. Okay. How do you hold space and be the person hearing it and wish that things could be different for them? That was the question. So, this whole issue of how can we help people that we love transform, it's a very tricky topic. So in this case, the question's being asked, I want to hold space for they tend to be bitter about many things, and I wish things could be better for them. The hook there for us, though this is a very hard concept, is not just the wish that things could be better for them, because that's, in our language, that's a prayer. We would say that we would want to pray for these people that we love who are stuck in this very contractive state. When it gets hard, there's two times it gets hard. But the hardest time is when it's really more than that, and maybe we're not telling ourselves. But it's much more about wanting them to change, that we don't want them to be bitter. We want or need them to be different. And there is no way in the world to make that happen. the only answer that I've ever come up with that ever makes any sense to me is live the teachings. Just live the teachings. You just be who you are. You be that uplifted soul. You show by example after example, because it is your life, about how you meet tests with a more positive, again, solution-oriented attitude. That's one thing. That's the best answer, really. Because people will either then get it and feel a deep desire to be more like you, have what you have. They'll see the joy in you. They'll start behaving more like you do. But you can't tell them to do that. If you tell them to do it, this is why Jesus said, don't cast pearls before swine. As soon as you tell them to do it, they're going to get more resistant. The other part about this that's just simply hard, and there's sometimes not a way out, and that is when you absolutely have to be living with that person. And that's very challenging. And all I can say about that is then you have to acknowledge that it's your karma and just say, okay, this is mine, and spend as much time as you can chanting, praying, being in a different room, focusing your, raising your eyes to the point between the eyebrows. That's not a small thing. When you do that, your energy comes up. You change the vibration and the energy in a room. I was just telling somebody, I don't think it was this class, but somewhere, that a friend of mine, it might have been you guys, I don't know, bought me this little recorder for Christmas, and he put a little microchip in it that just constantly plays Swamiji chanting Om, constantly. So you don't all have to write me or ask me about it. It's called Texsun, T-E-C-S-U-N. You can get it at Amazon. I have no idea how much it costs. Could be a fortune, I don't know, but anyway. Or you probably have to learn how to put the chant on that little micro, it's not a chip, but I forget what they're called. Anyway. But now, since then, I would say 90% of the time it's just playing in my home. It's just playing, because it will change the vibration of the house. It will change the vibration in me. You have Om playing constantly. You find yourself being uplifted towards that exquisite vibration. These are tricks that we need to learn, because there are those times in life, and I've been there myself, when we need to be around somebody or people whose vibration is much more coarse than ours, much lower than ours. But if what we're doing is spending all of our energy thinking, how can I change them? Why do they have to be that way? How can I make them different? This is awful. What can I do? We're in it. We're a part of the problem. We're not part of the solution. And it's hard. I mean, I just want to say that right out loud. But there are things we can do. And we can just keep asking God. Just keep constantly asking God, what am I meant to be learning here? How can I walk through this with greater and greater ease? What is the lesson for me? Show me the way. Show me the way. And all of those things help. You can't solve the problem by changing the person. That's the one thing that won't work. Yeah. Any more questions? Anybody have any other questions before we end for the night? Or comments? Yes, Evelyn. Unmute yourself, honey.
I was thinking that when that energy is around, you feel it, it's palpable, like
Yeah, it's quicksand. It's energetic quicksand. Yeah. Yeah, but were you done or did I interrupt you? You were done. Yeah, because it's amazing. You try this and it works. Just raise your eyes. Just look up. That small thing begins to change everything. It's almost unimaginable, but it happens. So I'm not saying it's going to transform your home, but I am saying it's going to transform you. And really, what else are we here for? So, all right, great souls, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.